Before starting this podcast, we would like to provide a trigger warning as we will be discussing topics associated with weight loss and body standards. If you are or have struggled with disordered eating, feel free to skip this podcast if you feel that listening will not be conducive to your healing journey. And with that, please enjoy our podcast. So throughout our podcast, we talked about how different factors have influenced our perception on body image and how kind of also society is putting pressure on women and men or just people of all people to look a certain way. And for our last episode, we kind of want to talk about what people can do on an individual scale to kind of like their body and like change their perspective on body image.
I think on an individual scale, something we can all prioritize and just think about before we criticize our body is understand everything that it does for you and how much more it is than just what it appears to be and what other people think of it. Because we're all so much more than our bodies and our appearance, and we need to start valuing ourselves as if that's true.
And I think another thing to consider is that healthy bodies on different people look different. And the problem with this, like with body image and our current view on it, is that there's just one ideal body type, when in reality, everybody's bodies look different, and like what's healthy for one person isn't what's healthy for others. So this is why I think we need to be very careful when commenting on people's body, even if you want to say something positive about it, because
I think even like positive comments like on people's body, or like giving people like a compliment on like, oh, how much better they look after they like lose weight or gain weight, or like how like great their body looks, and you can tell it's like a thinly veiled like, oh, you lost weight, or like, oh, you're so skinny. I think that could be really like damaging to people's like how they view themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like it's really like how we've always had like one like ideal body type, like it always changes, but there's always going to be like one body type that's like most coveted of all, and people have gone to such drastic lengths to change their bodies to fit into this one body type, when like most bodies are not going to fit into this body type. Like bodies come in so many different shapes and sizes.
Yeah, and I think another thing that needs a lot of work is that, as we'd previously discussed on other episodes, is that though the body positivity movement is kind of gaining traction on with like more female audiences, it is still very much lacking with guys. And I think that's something that society definitely needs to work on, because they can suffer from kind of these societal pressures as much as women, and they're just like told not to like let their feelings.
Yeah, because I guess we're really, as a society, we are beginning to try and address like body positivity in women, and what body positivity looks like for women, and what being inclusive and accepting of all different body types looks like for women. But I feel like we don't have this for men. Like we don't have this like circulating in mainstream media. We don't have this like attitude even like among guys like themselves.
And yeah, I think that another thing that we need to be careful about is that, like, obviously objectifying women is very frowned upon, but in a sense, women do the same thing to men. Like, in the sense that, like, in gyms or in videos, you talk about, oh, look how, like, nice this guy's muscles are, something like that. But if it's done in, like, the opposite direction for males, like, that's seen as kind of, like, predatorial almost, if guys do it towards women, right?
But I think it's not good either way.
No,
like,
no,
it's
exactly.
Not, it like promotes like unhealthy stereotypes.
But guys are forced to like take the compliment.
Yeah.
And like from the media now, like if you see a guy objectifying women, they will get cancelled, or like people will definitely.
Well, they're not gonna get cancelled, but some people
people
won't like it.
People will definitely speak up. Whereas if it's done in the opposite direction, a guy is told to just like, oh, take the compliment, like.
Yeah, I think guys definitely bang on about that. Like, it's kind of a double standard, and like women, like if a guy ever comments on a woman's body, it's like really, like they're called out for it. But then for some reason, women can comment on guys' bodies, even if it's a compliment. But then again, because like if a guy says to a woman like,
what nice,
you have really nice ass, like obviously he's gonna get called out for it. But if a
Yeah.
girl was like, you have really nice arms, like, no one's gonna say anything.
That doesn't feel the same to
It
me.
doesn't. No, it doesn't feel the same. I think it
Because
does
I think like
come from-
complimenting someone on their butt to me feels like very like explicitly like sexual, and it's like, to me, if a guy like says that, you're like commenting on like a woman because you're seeing them as like an object, like a sexual
But
object.
I think women do the same things with like the exact same intent.
Yeah.
I think it's also very much comes from a history, because there is a history of like guys preying on women, because like that is kind of what has happened in the past and what continues to happen.
I think it's
So
not necessarily women preying on men when they compliment them on like things. It's like women having like unrealistic like standards for men, or they're just like helping to perpetuate like
No,
unhealthy
But
standards.
I see like videos of women like objectifying men. Like I definitely see it where they're like, oh, I definitely date them, or things like that. Like,
But I think like another problem is like it's not just like women who are creating like unhealthy body standards for men. I think a lot of it has to do with like the culture like between like men like as friends. Like I know like sometimes like girls, like women with eating disorders are extremely competitive, and so if you're in a group of friends and you all have like an eating disorder, you can promote like really really disordered behavior among yourselves, and it can make you guys worse as a whole. Whereas I think you see the same kind of thing with men and like friend groups and like gym culture, like because you want to be like the most like the biggest guy like in your group, and you're always comparing yourself to other guys, and it ends up being a kind of competition to see who can have like the biggest muscles essentially, which is not very different from the culture you see with like girls and eating disorders.
yeah, I think that like one thing that we just need to talk about is to have these conversations. I think that is such an important initial step, where like a lot of people sometimes feel like they're struggling with things alone, or they're the only people experiencing certain things. But if we were just to discuss it, then people would see that it's not just them, and you'd feel much less alone about this. Because I think it's normal to be insecure about your body like every so often, and to be like 100% confident I think is unachievable. Because in this world where there's always somebody, like just confidence in general, in this world where there's always somebody who's going to be better at you at something, like it is hard to always be confident. But I think that to have these conversations, to have people who you can talk to, is really important.
I think a lot of like what comes from like not talking about like men's body positivity also comes from like not acknowledging like the emotions of men, I guess, or like our society's like approach to like women versus men. Like it's just like a continuation of that.
Definitely.
How like women are expected to be like I guess more like fragile and more like emotional, whereas men are expected to be very like stoic, I guess, and not like show emotion. And these stereotypes are harmful for both men and women.
I guess another thing to consider is that like eating disorders do lead to death. Like I feel like the repercussions of an eating disorder can be like, just like from in the public's eye, it does seem like much worse than a guy just wanting bigger muscles. But I feel like mentally it can have like
Mentally can have
similar
really
cons-
really severe impacts. And like I guess like what people notice about eating disorders is like the physical aspects of eating disorders, like what an eating disorder does to your body. But to me, like that's like these are just symptoms of an eating disorder, whereas like the true root of an eating disorder is like in your head. Like it's like a mental issue, and it's really really hard to address it. Like it's like it's very common. Like relapse is very very common too. Like even if you try really hard to like change your habits, like it's very difficult to break out of the eating disorder.
But I think just like another thing to consider is like, where does this all stem from? Like this pressure to look a certain way. And it's just interesting to me, like how how society has pressured women to look a certain way, because like we see how they've changed so much, and I think it's just interesting that like
I personally think it can root back to like a long time ago, when men were seen as like the people that did the work and they got money for their family, and women were purely to like stay at home and just do like the like in quotations like easier jobs, right? And they were seen to like, oh, you just have to like look good and you'll be like doing it right. And therefore there was pressure put on them to like, that's what they were valued as, to like look good. Whereas men were valued as so much more in the, I guess, more as a long time ago, but also still now, like it seems that men are valued for more of their characteristics than women are.
Yeah. I think that, like, another thing to consider is that a lot of, at least in the fitness industry, as we were talking before, like, to have credit, like, for people to think that, like, what you're saying is true, you need to look a certain way, because people's image of health is always associated to a body, not like other habits, because people can look very, very, like, fit and have very unhealthy habits. And I think that we just need to detach kind of what people look like on the outside to health, because it can be so different.
I think that's why people end up being like, why body image is like a problem in the first place, or why people are so insecure about their body, because it's the first thing you see when you look at someone, and it's kind of like, don't judge a book by its cover. Like, it's your like cover like of your book, and you can't like escape from it because it's who you are. And like, even if it doesn't like reflect like who you like feel like you are on the inside, like it's always on display to everyone else, and that like can cause a lot of insecurity.
And I think that like fat phobia is definitely a thing where people are treated differently because of what they look like.
I think it's also a problem in like medicine too, or like a problem with doctors like discriminating against those who are like bigger.
So in this world where we're constantly pressured by society, by the people around us to look a certain way, I think there's a few tactics that we can use in order to try to kind of reconcile with our own bodies and feel better about them. And as stated previously, I think that one really important thing is to value your body for what it does and not really for what it looks like. And another thing to consider is, as we said previously, that all bodies are different, and therefore health or fitness on different bodies will look different, obviously. So what you see on social media, I think the one really big thing to consider is that is not what health is always, and health for you can look completely different from what is portrayed on social media. And another thing is that if you just find that social media is just not good for you, I think, or is that because we've seen that social media does put a lot of pressure on young girls and young boys, and just adolescents in general, who are really vulnerable, and there's a really good chance for them to be influenced, is that if you see that for whatever reason social media isn't making you feel good, I think that one option is just to try to limit your usage, because we do see that like really a lot of media usage is linked to like poor body image.
I also think to make that choice, or just to understand like how much it is affecting you, you really have to focus on how you're reacting, how you feel after using social media, how certain posts make you feel about your body. Because if you're not aware of these changes and you think that they're not correlated, I think that's when a lot of damage can happen, because you're not actively making changes.
And I think that like the whole purpose behind our podcast was to shine light on these various factors which have influenced our current view on body image, and seeing how many of these influencers, their main goal is to profit, and or they come from like, I don't know, like racist past, where like certain our current view of the ideal body type is very much rooted in like the colonial view of what beauty looks like. So just understanding where these where this like ideal body type comes from is very important, and then like understanding why it's so kind of broken and how the system doesn't work, and really how it's just like made by corporations and companies who profit off of people and their insecurities.
Thank you for listening to our 5-part series on body image and beauty standards. We really hope that you enjoyed this podcast. We know that we really enjoyed talking about this topic.
We have more resources available on our blog, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us on our Instagram, which is @amen.podcast. Thanks for listening.